Hello, everybody. We are so excited you're here. We're going to give it another 2 or 3 seconds for folks to come in. Welcome. All right. I am going to say, let's get the show on the road. Hello, everyone. So glad you're here. I'm Diane Weiss here at MedTech Innovator, where I'm director of the US program. Welcome to MedTech Innovator Live, number 13 of 2023, in our series of weekly webinars that we do as part of the Accelerator program that runs for 4 months. We're running towards the end of the Accelerator program next week. Our finalists will be on stage, actually. The entire cohort will be on the MedTech Innovator stage at the AdvaMed conference. We hope to see you there. But back to this webinar. For those joining us on the live stream, MedTech Innovator is the largest accelerator of medical devices, healthcare IT, and diagnostics in the world. We're a downstream accelerator, which means that we're not looking for people with ideas, but people with companies that are up and running, have teams and prototypes, and some early evidence that the technology works. And then we partner them up with experts in the industry, strategics, and others to help bring that product as quickly and efficiently to the market as possible with as much value as possible. So we're excited to be here. We're opening up our webinars to the broader ecosystem beyond the cohort. And so if you are on that live stream on LinkedIn or YouTube, feel free to put your questions in the chat. And for the cohort companies, you know the drill. You can make use of the private Q&A that we do at the end of the public section of this webinar. So with that, it is my privilege to welcome today's speakers. We are talking specifically about scaling. And in order to talk about scaling, it's useful to have a perspective that is large company and a perspective that is startup. And so what that means is that we've invited Rob Bryant and Brandon Bendis to talk about those aspects as we discuss them. And I'll ask both of them to introduce themselves. They've done a lot of things, and this promises to be a great discussion. And so walking through their resumes would take too long. And it's also far more interesting to hear it from themselves. Rob, could I ask you to introduce yourself? And then I'll hand it over to Brandon. And we might just stay in that order to tee up the general space of large company, small company. How do we scale? Rob, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, briefly, my experience is going to come from 20 years with Medtronic, leadership roles, always in a scaling mode, always growing, looking to expand, build, whether it's organically with people, organically with products, or going to the outside market and bringing other acquisitions in. Primarily, I was involved in the more aspirational side as a national sales director, so much more applicable to the audience here.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Brandon, you are an MTI alum. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, but tell us about your work and yourself, please.
We are, and you mentioned before you saw that award sitting up in the corner there from MTI. So proud to be displaying that. My background, I've spent half my career at this point in kind of management consulting and building companies and advising them on then how to exit. So acquisition, IPO, but it's been on the company side, and then the other half of my career on the investment side, physically investing in the companies that are then building to then be acquired. So my perspective is a little bit unique in that I've kind of seen it from both sides of the table on what has worked. And I've had my share of successes in what's worked, and I've had plenty of my share in failures and what has not worked. And I think learning what has not worked has been even more powerful in helping us build additional companies, including the one that we brought through MTI last year. So glad to be here.
That is fantastic. Appreciate both of you being here. And so this is my opportunity to kind of just start with a general reflection on company scaling. So when are those inflection points? When do we think about scaling? What are the milestones and metrics when we think about scaling? And I'll start with you, Rob, and then get Brandon's perspective. When do we think about scaling?
I'm going to turn it into when do we think about selling, and then from selling, scaling. And I would say early. So many of the companies that I've spoken to, whether it's through MedTech Innovator or through from my times at Medtronic, it's got to be a very, very early part of the conversation versus waiting until you think you're ready to go to market and then trying to go and sell then. So earlier is better.
Agreed. I mean, earlier we're kind of building our companies for the end user, right? That's why we're developing what we're developing. So it's pretty much from the moment you open your doors, if you haven't thought about how you're going to reach them and then potentially what that could look like, we're missing a big step there. So the tactics for it are a little different, but I think it's very early and it goes through its phases. Overall, I think there's almost like it's almost like there's three considerations when you start thinking about selling and scaling from the beginning, right? It's kind of like understanding and identifying very crystal clear your end goal in what you want to be doing, whether it's how large you want to build your organization, if you want to sell your organization, if you want to build into $1 billion business or $100 million business, or maybe a $10 million business. It's that end goal. And then it's, what are your resources and what can you do to reach that end goal, and then match your strategy to those. But it's all from the beginning. I mean, it's one of the first things that we do in building companies. It's those companies, and I did this once and I'll never do this again, is started a business 25 years ago. This is really before my professional career officially kicked off. And I thought it was a great idea. And I didn't think about scaling and selling from the beginning, and missed half of my market, and then didn't have the right feedback and the right trajectory on it. So I almost think it's the first thing you do is you think about how you're going to get your product into somebody's hands, how you're going to get your solutions into somebody's hands. And if you haven't thought that from day one, you're putting yourself at a big disadvantage.
That's definitely something that is pretty much on every startup's mind. So I appreciate that perspective. And very often you start with that first customer, right? You get something into somebody's hand, be that a prototype, be that an early version of something. But then fast forward, think early, generating early evidence. We're talking about that interesting inflection point where maybe you just got FDA approval, or you're entering a different geography. Let's actually stick on that geography. Entering a new geography, that can be, what are the things we think about then? What are the anchor points? How do I enter a new geography? Let's start with you again, Rob.
Yeah, for me, as a sales leader, everybody wants to throw out the map and pick the top 10 cities, the top 20 cities. Do you line up clinically? Do you line up with end users? But I think you follow the sales. Honestly, you pick your first place where you're going to sell. You try to maximize the sales there as much as you can. And again, it comes back to the finances, keeping a focus on cash flow. If you try to branch out into, what are your ideal geographies, if you don't have the financial resources, which you need to be very, very, very conservative with, you can get overcommitted. You just can go in the wrong direction. So I always want to line up first with, okay, what customers can we find? And it might be in, a small second tier city. It might be in a Chicago, in a Dallas, in a New York City, but find the customer and build around the customer first. Then find the next customer, build around the customer that way. And that's how I think of geography and lining out a map.
So Rob, based on what you said, I think this is an area, and Diane, it's a good question, because I feel like this is where a lot of people also step into a trap. Rob, you made a comment. You said maximize your sales. What exactly does that mean? Are you trying to maximize revenue? Are you trying to maximize usage? What do you mean as representing $1 billion business? When you're looking at what is of interest to you, what exactly do you want to see maximized?
When I think about maximizing, it's just whatever the opportunity is at a given site. So if you've got a location where you can drive $1 million in business, get as much as you can there in one spot. But what you're doing is you're minimizing your layout of sales reps. So the fewer number of sales reps you can get by with initially, the better. And you maximize their time. And then the goal is to basically morph like, a cell division. But if you can, we had a thing in Medtronic. We want to build sales to a certain level and then split territories. That was our tried and true equation. I think probably it's nothing new. I think most people that have been involved with a large strategic would understand. But if you can build a territory to $2-3 million in sales, we had a number $1.5 million. So if you can split a territory, like splitting a cell, and at least preserve $1.5 million for an existing sales rep, and then take the other $500,000, $1 million and bring in a new sales rep. And so it's a splitting that way, and that's just our way of preserving and keeping the cash flow coming in and not overcommitting ourselves with our resources. And so it's the territory split, but that equation applies at a district manager level. It applies at a regional level. It applies, at any level of the map of the United States, from as small as a individual doctor to as large as a, multi-state geography. That was our equation.
So is it safe to say, it sounds like it, you said two things here, which resonated with me too, because in building out organizations, I've tried a few different ways to do this from a smaller company perspective, right? And I've put organizations in the US, I've put them in Europe, I've put them in Asia. And one of the things that there were two things you just said that sounded off based on what I've seen work and not work. One of them is efficiency, right? You were talking $1 million, you just mentioned $1.5 million, maybe even down to $1 million if you're saving $500,000 for something else. So we're not talking huge numbers here, right? These aren't tens of millions that you're having to drive. You're saying get to an area, be efficient, get to that area and let yourself then make the next leap efficiently. Use your resources efficiently. So that's one. And the other thing you basically said was, it doesn't matter where you are. The actual location doesn't play into whether that's attractive for you. You said you could do it at the biggest cities. You said you could do it in the smallest geographies, right? So what I just heard, do I understand that correctly? Is you're saying from the larger perspective is you want to make sure that you can drive that efficiency, and it really doesn't matter where you are as long as you can drive that efficiency to grow it.
Yeah, and my process would be I always followed sales. So if you've got a pocket that's, whether it's here in the Twin Cities, whether it's in Phoenix, Arizona, wherever it may be, that they're going to use your product. I mean, you can look at the West Coast, whether it's Los Angeles, San Francisco, the big cities there, but then you have the challenges of the IDNs out there and the GPOs. And that may slow things down. So what you want to, by following the sales, it allows you to work around, the areas that are going to slow your sales that you may try to invest in, but it might be a year, 2 years getting your product in. So, yeah, I don't think too much about the size of the city population as much as following the opportunity and letting the growth come from there, because there's other variables. There's the ID and GPO, there's the quality of your salesperson, there's the available talent in a given area. There's your product acceptance in one geography or another.
So we went straight to hiring sales rep, sales in-house. Let's take that step back and ask, and of course, with a large organization like Medtronic, that is an absolutely fair assumption. So this one, I might actually go straight to you, Brandon. When do you think about in-house sales folks, and could you save yourself time and effort by working with a distributor, an agent? Could you talk to me about the considerations around that? When do you have an in-house sales force? Where is that switch? Is it a good idea at the onset to work with a distributor or agent? And when do we talk about which one?
So great question. I've actually seen this from a number of different capacities, with billion-dollar organizations I consulted with, and then with some of our startups. And what I've seen work the majority of the time, or more often than not, is the tactic and which one you went with, whether you went with an agent or went with a distributor or went with an individual rep, depended on accessing. It was just flat out the efficiency argument and then accessing your customer. So if you wanted to build a bolus in a certain region, right? Then, for example, in Europe, most of European commercialization for a US company is going to be based on distributors, right? So you'd find the right distributor that had access to a very specific bolus of customers that you wanted to go to, right? You wouldn't need to cut off all of Europe. That would be a mistake. You wouldn't even want to cut off multiple countries unless you had one specific partner in each country. But again, you're going for efficiency, so it's the bolus. So I would say all three, your agents, your distributors, and your sales reps are on the table, right? The cards are there, and then you get to put them into the slots based on what matters most and what you're trying to accomplish there. Because the overall key is who can get you, or who has the best relationship to your customer. And what I see, the biggest mistake I've seen, and the one that doesn't work, but I see a lot of people fall into it, and I've fallen into it myself, is you try to go too far or hire too many of them because you just raised $10 million and now you have all this capital and you have to put it to use. And there is a period of time when you launch a product that you need to investigate, right? And it's better to take a little bit longer, but aim properly and then fire accurately, then take all your money, go out and hire 15 sales reps or 10 distribution partners or agents all over the map and say, okay, go get me $10 million. And we just heard from Rob that the biggest companies don't even want to see that amount of money. So there's like this discrepancy between what some of the investors or groups are saying. We just gave you 10 million. You have to go hire a huge sales force. And it's like, that could be the plan. And we can get there in 6 months or 12 months. But let's first run this little trial, do it in a certain region, watch what happens, and then go build your team according to which method works the best. Maybe distribution works well one place, agents work better in another place, direct sales work better in the third place, maybe a hybrid of all of them. But it's taking a little bit of time to get that right before you dump your $5-10 million into it. Will make or break teams that I've seen, at least. And I have too many examples of this. I've gone, machine gun style, where we've hired a lot of people across the globe. And the latest company we tried to do that with sold nicely, but it didn't even sell for close to what we've had another company with, which we took a year to go build out sales, figure out what worked, then only hired a few people, and boom, it was a big difference because we hit it right on the head immediately.
Diane,
I'll let you weigh in on that. Yeah.
I like Brandon's points on the hybrid. If you can do a hybrid where you have a director or two, where you have a distributor, an agent, based on a relationship, lends credibility. There's some quick instant sales. Now there's pluses and minuses. You have less influence on driving sales of a distributor or an agent, but they typically are going to be much more experienced in an area. They can turn something for you much quicker than trying to hire your own sales reps and taking them through the trainings. And because if you're hiring a direct rep, most likely you're not hiring someone with market expertise in your area. You're probably hiring them because they were a great salesperson, but they might be coming from a different area. They're just not going to know all the nuances of, the tribal knowledge versus going with a distributor. So if you can do, especially for the startup companies in the cohorts here, if you can do the hybrids, it's basically like balancing your portfolio. You can get going fast here. Maybe you can't drive super high sales there, but you can balance it all out nicely.
And I have two, Rob, based on what you said, I have two little lessons that I've learned over the years of what's helped and what's not. One of them is, if you're going with agents and distributors, they have the industry knowledge, they have the field knowledge, and they have the relationships. That is without a doubt. We know that's the case. You have to hand them a playbook.
Yeah.
Right. If you just go out to these two types of people, organizations, and expect them to immediately sell your product, you're going to be at a disadvantage in the launch. So go out, right, and create the right expertise so that you understand how to do things to be able to sell to them.
And it's especially you already started talking about international expansion, so you teed it up nicely for me. We've got a question from LinkedIn from Anand, who asked, what's the strategy for international market expansion? And so I'm happy to just open that to both of you, whoever wants to jump in first.
I'll turn that one over to Brandon.
Yeah, that's, again, it's a similar, my recommendation is a similar approach. I've done two different things, and I'll tell you which one I like. Well, I've done two different ones where we've put a headquarters or a location in another country directly and hired a team around it. That has a significant number of barriers and logistical complications to manage. Not saying it can't be done, can absolutely be done, but it takes way more time and it takes way more effort because there's a lot to manage, from legal structural issues to HR and benefits and hiring people issues to managing an office in a different culture. So if you have the financial resources to do it, and you have someone in your organization who's dedicated to truly overseeing that and launching it properly, then it can work very well, because there's nothing better than a person whose only calling or only priority is your business, right? You have direct attention at all times. That's their one priority. The challenge is obviously on the other side is it is a logistical, let's call it a nightmare. It is a hard process. I had an example. We placed an office in Asia once, hired in a whole team. We hired in locally sourced talent because the culture makes a big difference, right? And we wound up hiring an executive who had both US and local cultural talents. And the business did well, but it took a long time to get the team up and running. And we had a lot of turnover in the beginning trying to find the right formula until it worked. It was all very time consuming and heavily financially situated. So that was a significant undertaking to do. The flip side is you go with a distribution partner, you go with someone who might be carrying other products. They might not dedicate all of their time to you. They have conflicting interests sometimes. And as a result, asking them to launch you has other types of scenarios in it. Like, for example, what's the right pricing? How often do you need to support? What kind of materials do you need to create? These are questions they're not really going to answer for you, because their job is to connect you and sell you into their relationships. So it's coming up with which one is right for your organization. There's no right answer. Knowing which resources you have and knowing which pathway you can truly support.
Appreciate that. Let's flip that around. So Anand asked about US company expanding internationally. In the MTI cohort, we've got quite a few companies that are international companies, some with products in market in their geographies, looking to enter the US market. And so there's a whole host of questions, and I think we talked about some of that. But if you put yourself in the shoes of those companies, where do you go? And what are some of the considerations? I think you walked us through some of the high level buckets, but so, you know, should I be in one of the hubs? Should I be in Boston or San Francisco? Or Rob, you mentioned, you know, be in Chicago. You know, how do I even choose where and how I go to the US?
I'll start on that. You know, it's the relation. You got to find a relationship. It really is going to come down to finding somebody, a person. So if you're a startup and you're fairly bootstrapped, or maybe you've got, you know, maybe $5 or $10 million in a Series A to launch that commercial side of your business, find a person that in the US that you can fit with, that, and it doesn't matter where they live. But if they have some relationships, you know, as Brandon talked about in a distributor role, but where they have a relationship where they can walk in, they'll be your leader, but your sales leader ultimately, but they can also, they're prepared to be your first salesperson too. Again, I'm all focused on trying to keep your costs low. And that person can be anywhere, but that you got to network and find that connected person, and then just begin the sell transformation, you know, from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 2 to 4, as opposed to just trying to go in and launch a corporate headquarters in the Twin Cities with 10 people. I mean, if you have $200 million, that might work, that might, but most people don't.
Yeah, to Rob's point, there's actually a number of organizations that you can work with that help do these things, that help either identify distribution partners, both domestically and internationally. So, and I've worked with a few from different locations. I know, you know, they're there and they will help you expand. But Rob made a comment in the beginning that it's right, the 1 million, 1.5 million threshold he was mentioning. I feel like there's this fallacy that we as startup founders believe that like there is a thing called hockey stick growth, and there's not, right? Growth goes, it is rather linear in the beginning because you're growing and you're testing. So Rob mentioned he doesn't care about the geography, right? You can put it anywhere. So pick an area that either you're connected through from your network. You might have a friend whose partner works at some place and they're willing to give you a shot. And then you focus on that. It doesn't matter where the area is, test it. And based on what Rob just said, now hearing this from Rob too, I'll go test an area up to 1.5. I'll pick a city. I'll say, okay, I'll pick any city. It doesn't matter what it is. I'll find someone who's interested in our product. I'll pick a city and say, okay, can I get this city up to 1.5 million in revenue, right? Get me some usage to get me up to 1.5. And then I'll take all the lessons I learned from that. Like, what do I need to support 1.5? What kind of materials got me until that group of users started using me more often until I hit 1.5? Those are the iterations to go through. And once I have that, now I'll take that bolus and bring it to other cities or other regions. That is how I've found that building companies has been the most successful in my career so far, is start it small. You can work with any of these companies. I mean, off the top of my head, in my domain, I can tell you that I've spoken to, because I know people working at these places, I've spoken to Ortho Consulting Group, which is called OCG. There's a company called Sanford Rose that places people with distributors and can connect you with people. You can contact these groups, get connected with one or more if you want, and test it, and just test it.
You know, to Brandon's point, you know, I've been speaking very general, but let me give a very specific. At one point, we were developing a business at Medtronic in the sleep apnea field, and the number one guy in the U.S., he's in Milwaukee. Okay, not one of the first places we're going to think of, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but if you get access to this individual in Milwaukee, build your business from there, for example. Because if you think New York, if you think Chicago, there are some big hitters there, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of companies and a lot of products are being sold to those guys as well.
Let me follow up on some of those specifics on some of those organizations. Are economic development organizations or trade missions helpful? There are some states that have tax incentives. Are those things that you look into when you decide where to start? So I heard loud and clear, go where the love is, find that customer, build a business around the customer. That's very clear. But beyond that, are there other considerations? Brandon, you mentioned some of the organizations, and what I heard there, it is connections to organizations that get you to customers. So our investors who, do investors say, I want you to be close to me? Do economic development, trade mission organizations, are disease state organizations, think the American Association for the AMA, the American Heart Association, the American Association of Orthopedic Surgeons. Does that matter? How do we choose?
So about 10 years ago, it's actually longer than that, so it probably happened about 15 to 17 years ago, we received a major investment from an organization while we were building one of our companies, a major organization that wanted us to then locate a headquarters where they were, close to them. And we said, absolutely. This was a lot of money. It was going to help fund the whole company. This was a big investment from a big investor. And the developing that location and doing it and putting all that resource in there actually did not wind up being the successful part of the business. And in fact, taught me a lesson that if someone asks for that, it could be considered, but it shouldn't be the reason you accept or decline something. Because I've seen that backfire, and I'm going to turn this video off and see if I can flip it while I'm talking. I've seen that backfire way too often because it goes away from the love, right? Your love is your customer. And there are some investors who do want you to be close by to them. There are economic development agencies who could provide great tax benefits and great incentives to go to a certain place. My opinion is that this is a decision you make once you've already figured out where you're going. And if the investor or somebody else doesn't believe that or has a different say, it's a hard, that's a decision that you then have to make of, is it the right relationship? Is it the right investor? Can you do something differently and still go to where the love is? The answer may be yes. And if the answer is yes, great, then you get the best of both worlds. But if the answer is no, it's tough. And I would say, based on what I've learned, is going to places because of those things is not the way to go about doing it. It's you then, once you find where you're going to go, then you can tap into those resources and start looking at the opportunities there. But like you said, go to where the love is. And I've learned that the hard way too many times, and I will not do that ever again.
Thanks for that. Now, I'd like to come back a little bit to the hiring. You mentioned the building a team in a different geography, be that in another part of the world, be that in a local geography. Part of the consideration is really, do I bring someone in-house full-time? We talked about outsourcing some of that to distributors, but also, can I grow a company with an army of contractors, people who are not full-time? Can I, and perhaps if I do hire someone full-time, how do I incentivize them? Is it equity? Is it bonuses? Let's talk a little bit about how we make that work.
Absolutely. And I have something that I am very proud of in my career is, at least I've never actually had someone quit. one of my teams. So I hope, and I don't take that lightly. I'm honored that's the case. I believe it's also the result of countless hours that I spend attempting to learn and learn new ways to make the team environment fun and exciting and meaningful for people. So I spend an obscene amount of time trying to figure that out, because at the end of the day, you want people to want to work on and be a part of your team. Whether you're leading it or just on it, you want people as part of your team. The people you surround yourself with, you want them motivated and they want to be there. So my answer to you, which might be contrary to popular belief, I think you can absolutely build a company around contractors. A lot of people would hang me for saying that, including some of the people that I probably work with now. But I think you can. If you make the environment where your contractors prioritize you and they appreciate being with you, and you definitely have their back and they have yours, you can build it. And the best evidence of this is any collegiate sport, right? If you look at collegiate sports, technically their players are contractors, because in college, you're gone in 4 years. But yet certain programs have been national champions for 20 years, 30 years, 15. That's way beyond just that core group of people who are there. So that's almost akin to contractors, right? You don't have full-time employees that are there for 10 years, for 15 years, yet they can still build championship caliber programs that leverage quote unquote contractors. So yes, I think it's very possible. I think it has to go around, the meaning and what they're building towards and what you're trying to create. And if you align the incentives correctly, it's taking everybody's opinion into consideration. It's providing people with a piece of the business. It's granting equity. All of my team members in all my companies have equity. We don't not provide equity to people because we think everybody should have an ownership stake in what they're doing. But I think it's very possible. And I think you can build that domestically, internationally, as long as you have the right people behind you. I think it's extremely possible to do it. Now, you had another question earlier about, and remind me what that was. It was before building a team of contractors. You mentioned something else, and I blanked out on what it was.
Incentives, but you answered both of it. It was, contractors or full-time. And so you spoke to both of them earlier. I hearkened back to earlier parts of the conversation when we spoke about pairing up with distributors, which is an alternative to your team. But I came back to your team only. Staying with your team only, are some roles better suited for search firms? And so how does that work? How have you looked for and found people? Is it your own network? Is it search firms? You've clearly been successful. Nobody's ever quit. Congratulations.
Yeah, that's why I say that now. We're gonna have like 3 people quit next week, right? That's the way that it's gonna go. I hope not. Knock on wood.
I'm touching wood for knocking on wood. But in all seriousness, so you've made a great case for retaining great talent. Finding and recruiting great talent is hard too. And so, how do we do it? Is it search firms? Is it personal networks? How does it work?
Yeah, hardest to me, this is the hardest part about building a business in general, is finding the best talent, right? And yes, search firms are important. Yes, network's important. I build my teams a little bit differently in terms of how I locate who I'm looking for. A lot of people place a lot of emphasis on specific industry experience. I don't necessarily do that. I try to find people in this role, right? Because we're in startups. You need people who can wear a lot of hats, people who are okay with the ambiguity of a startup environment and are flexible. And it's very difficult to find those types of people, right? Where you really don't know if your paycheck's going to come in next week. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. And you have to be confident in what you're doing and building a business around that type of volatility and ambiguity, that you just don't have precise answers at all times. I've used search firms. I've used my own network. I think the key, at least what I've found, is I like to try, before I hire someone in, our team will try to do it first. And I don't mean launch something or fill the whole role entirely or submit a regulatory package or a reimbursement package. I mean our existing team, before we bring somebody else on to take something over, we'll try to get through all of it ourselves, because once we start doing that, we recognize what skills or what talent is necessary to complete a task. Then we hire the people with the skills to complete what we need them to complete. So I'll give you an example, right? We're talking about commercialization, right? So let's talk about scale and commercialization. Is when we hire in a head of sales, if you will, a lot of people will say, okay, I need a 25, 30-year industry veteran. I want someone who's managed 30 people and has built an organization up to, 10 million, 50 million, $500 million, however big you have. And I don't necessarily follow that thinking. My thinking is more along the lines of, number one is, as the founders, I better be able to sell on my own the first handful of customers. If I can't do that, that's a big problem, right? If I believe in my product more than anybody else, and I believe in my company more than anybody else, I better be able to sell it to someone. I should be able to find people who need this and who want to use it. So I'll go out and do that myself, right? And try to do that on my own to gain the experience of what other expertise is needed. Then I'll go find someone who has the expertise of either is connected to certain users we know we want to work with, right? Or has gone through the process of launching a product into an organization. I will typically find someone who's a little more green, who's willing to roll up their sleeves and perform those activities, which may take more knocking on doors, which may take more phone calls and physically doing things and physically supporting it. And then slowly get to the point where I may need a chief commercialization officer. Everybody has their own theories of how to build it. I find that helps me maintain efficiency financially and keep the growth moving. If I had $50 million and I could go hire whoever I wanted without worrying about where the money was or what, I do sometimes think about that differently, right? Where I might bring in the high-level chief commercial officer to then build the whole team below him or her. But the point is originally, even if I do that, I'm going to ask that chief commercial officer, you're doing it yourself for 6 months. And some people might say, no, I don't want to do that, right? I'm done doing that kind of thing. I'm in a senior executive position. I don't want to do that anymore. Then that's not the person that I'd hire. So a little bit different. You can go in either direction, but the way that I see it when you're hiring personnel is test market, right? Test before you grow. Because once you throw all your money at something, it's a lot harder to unwind it than to build it properly the first way or the first time.
Brennan, I appreciate that. I want to give you an opportunity to give our live audience advice that I didn't think to ask you about, or thoughts that came out of this discussion before we bid our YouTube and LinkedIn audience goodbye and go into Q&A. Is there, what would you tell companies that are out there scaling, things that they should keep in mind? Any advice you have for them?
What I've learned, and this is just my experience, what I've learned is there are way too many distractions and even fewer true areas that matter in regards to what to focus on. So I would say there's a lot of noise, and I have succeeded most when I drown out that noise. And it might feel awkward to say no to so many different people, or just not yet. I need to see how things develop, but stay super focused. That's, I think, the number one trap, and the number one thing I've learned is the more you're trying to do, the bigger you're trying to grow, the more, right? When I mean focus, it could be biting off too many countries when you try to expand. It's launching in too many places. Stay hyper focused, do what you are solely capable of, and build on it. Build from there.
Super. Brandon Bendis of Woven Therapeutics, thank you very much for being here today. We know that Rob Bryant had to drop off. But this is the time when we bid our online audience goodbye. And unlike other weeks, unlike the past 12 weeks, there will be no MedTech Innovator Live next week because we will all be at AdvaMed. So we're looking forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks when we talk about hospital purchasing, and wish you a great day. With that, Brandon, please stick around while I stop the live stream.